with an E or is it without an E?
All right. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We are going to start the evening with a work session. And Thomas and Wally, would you like to kick us off with the work session?
Sure, yes, ma'am. First thing I'd like to do, Madam Chair, with your permission, I'll say, is just look at the agenda, and I want to talk about our public hearings for this evening. I covered this in my email to you all packet, but just wanted to cover it again. The first public hearing for tonight's regular session is a conditional use permit by Matt Booth and Lynn Howard Overflow LLC for the operation of a tourist home. That is prepared for your consideration in regular session. The second public hearing was a request for a conditional use permit by Caleb Howard for the operation of a storage yard. That is not prepared for your consideration in regular session. I requested some additional information from the applicant that had not yet been provided, so I will kindly recommend that you all postpone consideration of that until your January, I believe, 19th meeting. I'll confirm that. It's the Thursday after the third Monday. And the third item was talked about briefly in our last meeting on November 7th was your consideration of the proposed CCIP, or Constrained Capital Improvement Plan, for fiscal years 24 and beyond fiscal year 2028. It is prepared, but I'll say under review upstairs, and I will again kindly recommend that you postpone consideration of that until January. With all of that in mind, we can still discuss the three items. Obviously, the one you'll consider in regular session more than the other two, but I can almost provide you a brief of the other two in as much or as little detail as you prefer. And unless you all have any questions before I begin, I'll start. And I plan on touching on the second and third items and then ending with the one that you'll actually vote on in regular session.
All right, that sounds great.
All right. The first one I'll talk about, Madam Chair, something that you're familiar with, but understanding we do have some new members, and hopefully in this, by the end of this month, we'll have an additional member. I do want to briefly talk about the CCIP. It's been a year since the city passed a CCIP, and the new one, like I said, is prepared, and a few items have thankfully disappeared from the last one. You all recommended to cancel, and they passed, but just wanted to go over exactly what this is very briefly for new members and the folks at home. This CCIP is the background. I'll show you, and I'll read it. The City of Pocoson's Constrained Capital Improvement Plan outlines the city's plan for achieving objectives and service delivery levels desired by City Council. The purpose of the plan is to forecast and match projected revenues and major capital needs over a 5-year period. The CCIP is an important management tool that strengthens the linkages between community infrastructure needs and financial capacity of the city. More specifically, the CCIP is intended to accomplish the following objectives, which you can read, but basically build and maintain facilities and equipment, et cetera. And this is not exclusive to city projects, but includes school projects as well. And that is basically how the process happens. At the beginning of the CCIP, the departments are asked for their projects to be submitted. Then we take those and compile those basically into one document. There is a capital outlay section of the plan, the gist of which is projects under $50,000, smaller items that aren't necessarily part of the CCIP itself. The one that you all will consider after the first of the year will be for fiscal years 24 through 28. And basically looks like this. This page that I have on the screen, it's broken down by project and basically departments. And we ask for, on individual pages, how the project relates to the comprehensive plan, anticipated cost, anticipating impacts on the operating budget, and other details. It does provide a good plan as it's intended for the city to replace equipment and maintain infrastructure and improve upon it as necessary for the future. So that is basically what the CCIP is and the function it serves. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, we'll get back to this after the first of the year.
Yep. I think once we take a look at it, then any questions we'll address to you. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I will get that to you all as soon as it is in its final version. The second item I'd like to speak with you about tonight is the conditional use permit request by Caleb Howard for a storage yard to be operated at 789 Poquoson Avenue. And that address may be familiar to you all and those at home. It is the parcel that served as the home of the Tom Hunt store, which has since been relocated to the Poquoson Museum property. It lies between Riggins Motor Company and 789 and 1/2 Poquoson Avenue. Mr. Howard is, and we have both applications are conveniently have applicants whose last name is Howard. So Caleb Howard is the applicant for the storage yard. He owns a small contracting business and has purchased the property in hopes of storing his business equipment there. In our conversations with him, the materials, I'll say, that are in the works stem from the survey he recently had completed of the property as it sits now. And you are familiar with the requirements of storage yards in the city, and the buffers and things of that nature, and the screening. We've had that conversation multiple times. This, I'll say, plan does show some elements that will show some elements that we're going to require. We actually got a conceptual today, but this is a survey. The plan that'll be presented to you will show his fencing, landscape buffer, et cetera. The property does have challenges just because of its size and the intended use. So staff, we have met with Mr. Howard and encouraged him to speak with adjoining neighbors and provide us and ultimately you all with letters from them that they're okay with the use and okay with the proposed method of screening. So we will get that all to you next month for your
Open
consideration.
storage, or will there be a building?
Well, he will use, if in the rear of the property, there is still an existing garage, and he will use that for storage, but basically will fence or screen the rest of the property to store his work trailers and trucks. So like I say, it does have its challenges because it is fairly narrow, but I'll say some of what he's asked, some of the conditions or relief thereof does will make the property useful if you all recommend approval to cancel. What's that?
Thomas, what is the width of that parcel?
Well,
Can't see the plat.
the front of it, it's about 67 feet, and it narrows from front to back. Not greatly, but it does. So his plan will basically continue the fences on the fence lines, the property lines of adjoining parcels, but we have recommended and encouraged him strongly to present a landscaping plan for the front of the property. So it's not an eyesore, and to this point, he's been pretty agreeable to that. But absent of the plan, didn't feel ready to present it to you all tonight, so encouraged him to finalize his application, and we'll present it for your consideration next month.
Thomas, would that be, because of its size and being so narrow, would that be a non-conforming lot for any residential opportunities?
It is a legal non-conforming lot. It would not, it is zoned residential, but there really hasn't been a use on it in decades. I'm not sure, I can't give you a date of when the store actually closed, but I don't think, at least to my knowledge, there's been a residential use of the property in a very long time. So it would be, to answer your question, a legal non-conforming lot. And it, depending on the size of a home that someone wanted to build there, could someone make it work without variance? Maybe. Would someone need a variance per desired house plans? I'll say probably. But it is zoned R1. That, I'll say corner there, actually Reagan's is zoned R1 and hasn't been used for residential purposes since Reagan's Ford has been there. So it's 789 and a half Poquoson Avenue. It's a single family home.
It is single family.
Yes, ma'am.
The little building out front, I guess, is the barber shop and the hair.
Yes, ma'am. And the lines, on GIS, of course, are not 100% accurate, but you can see the access that he has to the lot better in the survey. We had also discussed the possibility of screening the entire front and a landscape buffer the entire width. However, that would grant him no access to the storage yard itself. So inevitably, this will have to be accessed from the front of Poquoson Avenue. And we I sent this plan today to folks at Fire to ask their opinion of the width of the gate and how they feel about access. And we'll ask him to reflect those recommendations in his presentation as well, because we certainly, for his benefit and ours, don't want a storage yard or any use for that matter that's not accessible to public safety as they would require.
Will they address the building in the rear as well then? I said they our property?
They'll address the property in its entirety with their recommendation.
Can you go back to the previous map? Yeah, that one. So am I understanding that the owner does not own either of the properties aside of this one?
He does not.
Okay.
He does not. But he has conveyed to staff that he has spoke with the adjacent property owners and has conveyed to staff that none of them take issue with his proposal, but we have asked him to get that in writing from his neighbors so that we can provide that to you all. And of course, as always, they were sent adjacent property owner notifications. I have not heard from them, but we do our very best to make sure adjacents are very aware of projects proposed.
So the property to the left is the hair salon and the car?
That's right. The property to the left is the little building that currently houses a barber shop, and then, of course, the larger building is Riggins. Right. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, but I think that covers the gist of what you'll see next month. Obviously, you'll have a better plan as we have asked him to provide.
Setbacks come into play here if he's not building a building?
He's going to show that fence in the front at the 35-foot edge of pavement, boundary line, the front boundary, building line setback, because then we're requiring the landscape buffer in front of it. So he in his application, don't take this for the gospel, but I think he said 2 trucks, 2 trailers, but it's trucks and enclosed trailers. To my knowledge, he
A
may have an
bulldozer.
open trailer, but nothing.
Not like bulldozers or things
No
like that?
heavy equipment.
Okay.
Nothing that's going to stick 25 feet out of the top of a
Right.
6-foot fence.
Right, okay.
So that's what he's detailed in his application, and just the nature of his business. I don't have, reason to believe it'll be any larger equipment.
What's at the rear, what's behind that property? on the rear?
It's residential.
Okay.
It's another home. 40 Wrens Road, that's accessed by Wrens, but it's another home. It's surrounded completely by houses with the exception of the left side where the Riggins Ford is.
So that'll be interesting to see. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction of it, though. That's going to be interesting to start chewing on that. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Moving on to the application that you will, Madam Chair, consider tonight in your regular session, as I stated previously, but I'll state again, is a request for a conditional use permit by Booth and Lynn Howard of Overflow LLC for the operation of a tourist home to be located at 430 Wythe Creek Road, tax map parcel 27, TAC 1, TAC 114, Zone B2 Business Commercial. This application, as I just read, and perhaps exaggerated a bit, is for a tourist home. It's for a tourist home because our code defines tourist home, although does not permit it in any use in any zone of the city. I can go through my PowerPoint first, then I have some other items that I think I can expand upon a bit should you have any questions. I won't read again for you the request and the applicant, but the city code consideration is what's important. The zoning ordinance defined a tourist home as a dwelling in which overnight accommodations are provided or offered for 3 or more transient guests. However, a tourist home is not a permitted use in any zoning district within the city. We advertised tonight's public hearing in the Daily Press November 19th and 26th. Adjacent letters were sent to necessary property owners on November 10th. About the use, verbatim from the application is for a tourist home fully furnished and outfitted for lodging for 1 to 30 consecutive nights. This is the proposed site, 430 Wolf Creek Road. I took the picture on the left last week. It is a single-family home that was built in 1949. However, the lot is owned B2 Business Commercial, and to my knowledge, it's always been used as a single-family home. There are 7 conditions that staff is recommending to you all to recommend to City Council. The first is that the business will be subject to all applicable taxes as determined by the Commissioner of Revenue, to include a transient occupancy tax at time of implementation. That this is the segue to the short-term rental discussion, because how short-term rentals are taxed are by transient occupancy taxes, which you all know we do not have in the city code right now, but will after the first of the year. And we want to make it clear to the applicant at such time of implementation of those taxes, they'll be subject to those. Second condition is that all signage shall be subject to architectural review. The property is in the Architectural Control District. That architectural review could be done by staff with the guidelines of the Architectural Review Board, but if anything proposed warranted their review, we would certainly take it to them for consideration. The use must comply with all local, state, and federal permits, licenses, and regulations. If at any time this use is operating in violation of any of the regulations set forth by the aforementioned agencies, the City Council may revoke the permit. If at any time the specified permitted use on the property is discontinued for a period of 2 or more years, this permit shall become null and void. At no such time shall more than 2 persons per bedroom occupy the dwelling. The sixth condition is that parking for the use shall be accommodated for on-site in a paved driveway and/or parking area as approved by community development staff. Parking spaces shall be provided at a rate of 1 per unit and 1 per bedroom. And of course, the seventh condition is that City Council reserves the right to review and amend the conditions of the permit as they see fit. A few of those conditions, specifically 5 and 6, also 1 and 2, do serve as, I'll say, the introduction for some short-term rental language you'll see next year. There is differences in what I believe will be the short-term rental applications in this one, and that is primarily that this is in our central business district on a lot that is zoned for business and commercial uses, whereas a vast majority of short-term rentals will be in residential districts, in neighborhoods. So it is a bit different, but the fifth and sixth condition, we devised as staff in conversation, and we think will definitely apply to short-term rentals when that language is adopted in the city code. I am happy to answer any questions you have right now. If not, I'll kind of continue giving you some background into this.
Bedrooms are in the property?
4. 4 bed, 2 bath.
That's 4 cars, theoretically.
Theoretically.
One per bedroom, right?
The condition is 1 per unit being interchangeable with dwelling, so at least 1 parking space required, period. You gotta have 1,
What does
and
that
an
mean?
additional 1 per bedroom. So this would require 5 total.
5.
5 total.
Are there 5 parking spaces at that property?
There is parking and a paved driveway on the side of the home, and I need to get you all, he did provide a survey with the application. I'll get you all a copy of that before our regular session, but it's hard to see because of the trees, and it isn't exactly detailed in the application, but there is parking in the rear.
5 to handle?
It
cars?
would accommodate 5. Yeah, I'll get you a copy of it before the regular session.
The proprietor reside.
I am not sure. Again, the properties are now owned by Overflow LLC. 2 gentlemen, Matt Booth and Lynn Howard. It's my understanding that this house was the former home of Mr. Howard's parents, but where they reside, I am not sure. Mm-hmm.
Wife lived there next to that, and he owned that house, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
And I was just wondering if they had some sort of property manager, someone who lived nearby to take care of any issues that may arise.
I'm not going to speculate on where they currently reside. I think they can certainly answer the question, but from conversations with them about this application and other projects, that both of them, I believe, are local. I'm pretty sure Mr. Booth lives in Williamsburg, and I believe Mr. Howard is local too, but you can certainly ask him.
My only concern is the proximity to the 7-Eleven. I'm sorry. My only concern, and without seeing a survey to really see how much land is behind it, is that one driveway right there at the 7-Eleven and at that intersection. That is one busy, busy intersection trying to get in and out of there. And I'm just thinking 5 cars parking, obviously in the back, so that each one can get out. It just seems to me,
Well, I think.
you have take the aerial off and let us just look at the property lines. There we go.
I can, let me see. I may not be able to. Let's try this.
Well, yeah, it's always been a rental home, but it just doesn't look to me to be that big of lot for
The,
5 cars to be in the back of it and still access that single.
But it may not always be 5.
right,
No, I know, but I'm just saying, assuming that, I'm just thinking like if you go somewhere as an Airbnb, typically, well, I don't know about typically, but I know typically when I've used one, each couple drove their car. So theoretically, you have 4 bedrooms for each couple, if you will, and so that's, that's 4 cars. So I was just wondering how they gonna maneuver in and out of the back onto that driveway to get out at that busy intersection, because there's McDonald's right across the street, 7-Eleven right beside it, and then, Rite Aid right there. Not that I'm opposed to it, I'm just, the logistics of it, it just seems to me that we would need to see some sort of parking arrangement. If it has to have a minimum of 5 parking spaces, then I think that needs to be shown on a plat, how they're
Well,
laid out.
And we do address that in that condition. I'll read that again for the folks at home in case the screen is blurry. Parking for the use shall be accommodated for on-site in a paved driveway and/or parking area as approved by community development staff. So the vision is that when this evolves into short-term rental applications and those CUPs, is that they will provide a plan to us as staff and show us the plan for this on-site parking, and we will either approve or deny that as we deem appropriate. So we certainly, I think there is a little leverage to speculate on the functionality of the property, but more so, of course, the concern of the city is that if these uses are approved, that the parking is in a paved driveway or approved area on site, so that we're not filling public roads with cars of folks frequenting a rental, or have six cars parked in the front yard of someone that may be using their home as a short-term rental.
Parcel beside it, the long narrow parcel beside it.
To the south, or?
Yeah. Well, I guess to the east.
Well, but they do. They own both parcels.
Oh, they own that parcel as well?
This is an Overflow LLC owned parcel, and the RAH Homes
Is also
One
owned?
LLC is also Mr. Howard and his partner.
So-
They own each adjoining property.
So is that parcel designated to be used with this parcel, or are they planning something different for that parcel?
This is an entirely separate parcel,
Okay.
and this parcel is owned R1 residential.
Okay, so they're not planning on, no part of that property is going to facilitate the tourist home then?
Not per this application, no ma'am. And this will be either recommended for approval or denial for this address and tax map parcel solely.
So, just history, is this the first time we've received a request for a tourist home?
It is. It is the first formal application for a tourist home, and the reason for it is that tourist home we actually define in the code, and this fits. Now, it was tailored, of course, with a forward thought of short-term rentals, and the 1 to 30 days is, I'll say, in the theme of that, because state code defines short-term rental means the provision of a room or space that is suitable or intended for occupancy for dwelling, sleeping, or lodging purposes for a period of fewer than 30 consecutive days in exchange for a charge for the occupancy. And once the Commissioner of Revenue presents that language to council for transient occupancy tax, and community development staff present short-term rental language to you all in the zoning ordinance, we will use those state code definitions as they've defined it already.
So my question, clarification is, if these zoning changes are coming and these guides are coming, would this be something we postpone until we have that guidance, so we're not using the first application as the guinea pig before the new changes come down?
Well, this would be
I-
grandfathered if it went through today.
I will say this. I think the conditions are very much what you will see for short-term rentals. But this is different, like I mentioned earlier, because this property is zoned B2 commercial. And the guidance, I will say won't be exactly the same, or conditions rather, if it is in a residential neighborhood, the condition where we make these subject to all local, state, federal regulations, permits, I mean, that applies to every part of our code, the noise ordinance and things of that nature. So I'm not sure if if the short-term rental language will actually address this application better than the one before you does, given the zoning.
Right, but right now, we have no guidance on tourist homes at all until the new language comes out
Well-
in January, correct? We have no set process, we haven't discussed this, it hasn't come before us.
The process currently is the one you all are considering, which is approval by conditional use permit, and we don't envision that changing even for short-term rentals. The process will be, I'll say, legislative in nature more so than it is administrative. So the application process is very much the same, and we will bring short-term rental applications to you all as conditional use permits, because there won't be a recommendation from staff that they be by right in residential districts.
I know that further down towards Wood Creek Road, going back out, that bed and breakfast. Was this tourist home, was that part of or responsible for allowing that bed and breakfast? Is that when this came into our language, do you know? And how does
I
this-
don't know.
Okay, and how does this affect the bed and breakfast does that still exist? Is it still in existence?
That bed and breakfast is no longer in operation.
No longer in operation,
No,
so it's
ma'am.
been over 2 years, so that would also be a conditional use permit, correct? I mean, that's not a by right use, is it?
I can't, not there. That's a residentially zoned property as well. I cannot tell you about how that was approved, because I honestly don't know. I think that property had been used, I'll go back to this, as a bed and breakfast for decades, until probably about 10 years ago. And the method of approval, I'm not even sure I could put my hands on, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do we have other cases in the city where we have residential homes on property that's zoned for business, like this one?
I think, well, there is, the property down to the south of it is an example. That's also part of the business district. And there, without going parcel to parcel, I'm comfortable with saying some others. I won't tell you that there's a great number of them, but I will say there are probably some others, whether it's B2 or B1.
I would say this, if we agree to pass this or agree to it, I think it opens up the door for anybody in a B1, B2 to have this type of property, that once you approve one, I mean, what would prohibit you from approving more than one? I know there are several Airbnbs in Bocosin that are in residential areas. I don't know how that will work moving forward, the code being 30 days, I think it's less than 30 days, right?
It is.
The code reads,
It is less than 30 consecutive days, is how the code reads. Otherwise, one would assume would be
I'm just
rented
saying.
as a monthly rental. But this giving the existing residential use of the property, however, keeping in mind its commercial zoning and location in the central business district. As far as tourist homes or short-term rentals or serviced accommodations, as far as they go, to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure if there are more or better suited parcels than this one. And one could assume the one immediately to its south.
And then moving forward, if we do address this via ordinance, via city ordinance, and that would supersede any of our previous decisions.
The conditional use permit, it would essentially grandfather the use, regardless of code
Then
we
going
pass
forward.
later. But then, of course, any short-term rental applications submitted will fall under the guidance of the new code. And again, this staff is not going to recommend to you all new code in the zoning ordinance that makes short-term rentals permitted by right, but we will define the language basically as the state code does, and provide general guidelines. And of course, what you'll find will be general conditions as these are submitted. But the process will be very much the same to exactly what we're doing now, and that'll be by conditional or special use permit.
So, and for context, and I think it's coincidentally, York County, I think this week is actually, their planning commission is having a session to specifically address the short-term rentals, because from what I was reading in their agenda, they needed some more nuance, or they needed some more clarification in their ordinance. So some of the things that they were mentioning, and this is just from the agenda, was that the owner or proprietor reside either in the home or in the adjacent premises, but that they can waive this requirement if they designate a responsible party to promptly resolve problems that arise, and that also that the Board of Supervisors or council may limit the number of rental nights per year at their discretion. So they've been, it sounds like they added some layers to that. And I think having a responsible designee is
It is, and that's a pretty common theme throughout the Commonwealth, and some of the folks from other localities I've had the opportunity to speak with or hear from is that some kind of responsible person within a certain proximity to the property. Like you said earlier, I think you said a property manager or whatever, however you want to term it, it is certainly a good idea. And it's something, we all can certainly do.
When do you anticipate bringing that language for us? Because I'm just wondering, would it be prudent for us to just wait until this language is in place and then consider this application? When do you anticipate bringing that forward to us?
Well, that will come to you all unless Wally has a different suggestion, but I'll say probably, I would say the spring of next year with the zoning ordinance, which, as you know, is pretty lengthy and does need some updating. But this use, as far as taxes are concerned, will be subject to the same requirements as short-term rentals at such time they are implemented. I won't speak for the Commissioner of Revenue, who's currently in our AV room if you need him, but I anticipate that language to be implemented July 1st of next year. So
Would this one be subject to occupancy taxes collected on a?
it will be. It will be.
I do appreciate the applicant of going through the process and taking the time and spending the money to
Right.
do this properly. And for me personally, I want to ensure that they get a fair, I don't want to put them off more because they've done the right thing.
Right.
And they've gone through the process.
And to be quite honest with you, you know, as far as the short-term rental language is concerned, I'll say, you know, it'll be much more housekeeping in nature beyond general conditions will require with each application. And I'm not sure how much language in 5 months will you know, change the nature of this application or the outcome anyways, considering 4 of the conditions at least are what you'll see with the short-term rental language and/or applications.
And just to just to clarify, no matter what the recommendation is this evening, that will be, it's not that this will automatically open the floodgates, because when we do have the zoning ordinance, that, first of all, everything will be a conditional use, so we'll be able to look at each particular application, whether it fits the neighborhood, whether it fits all of that. But then also, if we do put more stringent guidelines in the future ordinance, particularly in the residential areas, that will all, what we're doing here will be superseded by what comes.
That's correct. And the nature of this application, being that we do have a definition of tourist home, which is very consistent with the proposed use. It's commercial zoning. That's, I and staff would recommend approval to you all. I can tell you if one of your neighbors brought to us an application next month for a short-term rental in a residential neighborhood, the recommendation may not be approval before the adoption of language. So I think you articulated the difference well. Because I don't envision the short-term rental language is really tailored more towards the commercial nature of a short-term rental in a residential district, whereas this is a similar use, but it is in a commercial district. That front With Creek Road.
Pardon?
That front With Creek Road.
Because
and
the
that,
next house and then the next parcel is a gas station, right? So
That's
those two
right.
parcels are actually zone B2. Is that what you're telling me?
that is correct.
I'm not mistaken, the front of that long.
That's,
Oh, well, no, that's our two. I stand.
That's
it's
residential
the
behind the
R1, but that just shows the access. Zoom out and give you a better picture.
So the application is through 30 days, is that correct? So will we make that 30 days or less than 30 days per the Virginia code, or?
The application is for 1 to 30 consecutive nights.
The code is less than 30, right?
The state code for short-term rentals is for less than 30.
So it should be in line
When we bring the short-term rental language, we're going to bring their definition of short-term rental, which,
I mean, right now,
Sure.
we already know what the Virginia code is for tourist homes, fewer than 30 consecutive days.
well, that's the definition for short-term rental. The definition of tourist home I showed you all is our code definition of tourist home.
But it doesn't put a limit on it, does it? It has no limit on it.
The application is listed as 1 to 30 consecutive nights.
Maybe I'm just not clear, but I'm saying if we're going to look at short-term rentals, what this is, it's not, I mean, that's what it is. It's not necessarily,
Essentially,
although it may meet that very vague definition of tourist home, it just seems to me that since the code, I think that we should be following the code moving forward for any short-term rental, following Virginia code. And so-
that's exactly what we'll do, yes, ma'am.
So, to me, that's what this is. It's a short-term rental, and it should be subject, I think, to the code, fewer than 30 consecutive days.
I do, I sympathize with what you're saying. We currently define tourist home. We don't define short-term rental, which is why the applicant applied for it as a tourist home, because we define the use in our code. But of course, moving forward, once we present to you all the short-term rental language, we'll use the SACO definitions.
So Thomas, right now, when they put in the application, the option is to check tourist home. There's not a check for
Well,
short-term rental. Is that the
There is not
issue?
a definition for short-term rental in our code.
So, but there's a definition for the tourist home.
That is correct.
So that's why it was selected on the application, and that's the definition per our current code.
That's exactly right.
Okay. So as we look at the new code coming down, we're gonna move from tourist home language to short-term rental home language.
Short-term rental, yes, ma'am.
And when that short-term rental information comes through, it'll change from lodging for 1 to 30 consecutive nights to be in line with the state code of 30 or less nights, correct?
That's exactly right.
So basically, we're looking at a
But-
current verbiage that, but yet down the pike, we have different verbiage that we know that's coming but isn't in place yet.
That's correct.
So right now, we're being asked to make a decision based on the current verbiage we have now,
That's right.
because anything new is not in play yet.
But there is no
Well,
time.
we can't, I would say that is generally, correct, and we wouldn't, normally ask the applicant, to apply for it as a use, that we don't define, but we do define tourist home. But I think, I'll say the intention, is very much the same.
So Thomas, could we theoretically then, to help satisfy that, append the first sentence of condition 3 to be comply with all local, state, and federal permits, licenses, and regulations for short-term rentals?
We
that
we
would-
don't currently define short-term rentals, so
So, okay, so we don't have local, so can we say must comply with all state and federal permits, licenses, and regulations pertaining to short-term rentals, and then have the local for the tourist home?
I think that's a fantastic question for the city attorney.
I would tell you, I think right now it's unnecessary language. I think you guys are asking a question, and the answer is essentially right now what you're trying to figure out is 1 to 30 days the same as less than 30 days? That's essentially what Thomas is saying, proposed or potential future language change. In order to match the state code is gonna go from a tourist home description of 1 to 30 consecutive days to matching the state code of less than 30 days. It's the same thing, it's just phrased differently to specifically match what the state code currently says. It's still gonna be a short-term rental, however you call it. Currently, the city code defines it as, or identifies it as a tourist home. Potentially, and we don't, Thomas is estimating on the time frame. I mean, we're pretty good at estimating those things. But the foreseeable future is going to adjust that language in the code to just define what a short-term rental is. It's not necessarily going to replace tourist home. It's just going to add a separate definition that most likely will match tourist homes. And it's possible, you know, again, this is speculation, but depending on how it is added to the code, it could be that tourist homes apply to commercial zoning. Short-term rentals apply to residential zoning. That's a possibility, but we don't know that right now, so it's all speculation. And to try to make a decision based on possible language changes that are coming 6 months to a year down the road versus looking at what's currently in the code that has language that for all intents and purposes will be the same as what we're discussing possibly in the future. I would advise you guys to look at what it currently says, what the current definition is. If you're good with that current definition as the applicant has put in this application, then we will go with that.
And with that being said, I would like, this was a great work session. I'm glad that we had this time. And I'd like to continue this discussion as part of the public hearing during the regular session. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the public hearing. And does anybody need a break before we start?
I did
Yes.
want to get for you a copy of the survey, so I'm going to step out and do that. And I will be right back.
All right. Yes.